detective believes I'm lying about the murder, but my deepest fear is that I'm only lying about the accident.
Fluent Fables. Learn English with story.
Part 1. The Onset of Doubt. The Interrogation. Now. The fluorescent light of the interrogation room was a harsh, unblinking sentinel refusing to concede to the gloom of the storm outside. It accentuated every cavernous shadow beneath Dr. Eris Thorne's eyes. He hadn't slept in 72 hours, a self-imposed penance that had left his mind a treacherous kaleidoscope of verifiable truth and psychological delusion. Across the cheap laminate table, Detective Sarah Lind was an island of unnerving calm, her presence a meticulous study in unwavering skepticism. "So, Dr. Thorne," Lind began, her voice a low contralto that offered no comfort. "For the record, you arrived at Elias Vance's penthouse at approximately 10:45 p.m. You claim you were there for a private, unscheduled consultation." Eris rubbed his temples, a gesture that failed to soothe the gnawing ache behind his eyes. He meticulously straightened his tie, a final futile attempt to project professional composure. "That is correct, Detective. Elias was highly distressed. His mental state had become quite volatile, rapidly deteriorating following the latest board meeting. He called me in a near catatonic state, a rare break in his usual stoicism. He intentionally used formal, precise psychiatric language, the remnants of his professional shield. Had I not gone, would any of this have transpired?" The conditional perfect hung heavy and accusatory in his silent query. Lind leaned forward, her expression betraying nothing but measured calculation. "And yet, Dr. Thorne, Mr. Vance wasn't a formal patient, was he? He was, by all accounts, a patron whose financial influence was instrumental to your foundation's continued solvency. We've seen the contribution records. They are substantial, bordering on extortionate." The subtle accusation was a needle-sharp jab. Eris forced himself to maintain eye contact, the effort alone requiring monumental self-control. "Our relationship was nuanced, Detective. It had recently become fraught with professional tension, I concede, but my primary obligation remained ethical, a fundamental duty of care, irrespective of his philanthropy." The word philanthropy tasted like ash. Elias's generosity had always been conditional, a facade for sophisticated coercion. He was not merely a donor, he was a silent, omnipotent partner in Eris's ethical failure. Eris allowed a calculated pause, letting the weight of the moment sink in. "My decision to visit was entirely rooted in my professional assessment of his immediate psychological risk. His instability had reached a pivotal point. He was a menace to others and potentially to himself." He recalled the sudden, violent power cut that had plunged the penthouse into an absolute, suffocating darkness. The moment the lights died, the conversation, which had been a civilized, though acrimonious debate, had devolved into something primal and terrifying. He could almost feel the weight of the air, thick with unsaid malice, the sensation so intense that a palpable dread had settled over him, suffocating his capacity for rational thought. The darkness felt not like a lack of light, but like a heavy, smothering presence. Lind placed a slim folder on the table, its edges unnaturally sharp under the light. "You stated the power outage was total, that you were scrambling in the dark, unable to see anything. Is that an accurate summary?" "Precisely. It was pitch black. The backup generators, for reasons I still cannot fathom, failed to engage immediately. I couldn't even discern the outline of the furniture, let alone Mr. Vance's movements. I felt utterly disoriented." He remembered bumping into a heavy, unseen object, which now, in retrospect, could have been anything. The memory was fugitive, impossible to pin down. "A curious detail," Lind mused, tapping the folder with a fingernail filed to a military precision. given that the building's security system, a state-of-the-art marvel, operates on an independent military-grade battery. The internal motion-sensing cameras continued to record for another 3 hours after the grid went down. They only failed when the secondary battery was deliberately drained.
The admission was a gut punch. Eris felt the carefully constructed architecture of his testimony crumble under the pressure of verifiable technology. His insomnia, his confusion, his meticulously selected vocabulary all suddenly felt like the frantic, clumsy efforts of a man trying to cover one's tracks. He looked at Lind, who watched him with the detached curiosity of a scientist studying a flawed specimen. If I had truly been innocent, why had I not simply told them I saw nothing? The realization hammered home. His perceived innocence was already irrevocably compromised by his omission of the truth. He had lied to protect himself, and in doing so had created the perfect illusion of guilt. Part 2. The Tainted Past. The Compromise Then. The image of Lynn's skeptical face dissolved, replaced by a memory. Sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Eris's former office months earlier. The scene was bathed in a golden, deceptive warmth. Elias Vance, arrogant and immaculate in a custom suit, sat where patients once found solace. He wasn't seeking therapy, he was demanding absolute, humiliating leverage. "Your reputation, Eris," Vance had purred, spinning a solid gold pen, his eyes gleaming with malicious satisfaction. "It's built on the principle of do no harm. A beautiful, quixotic concept, really. But what happens when that principle is revealed to be a sham, compromised by your own negligence and poor documentation?" Vance wasn't merely threatening him with a lawsuit. He was threatening to orchestrate the public destruction of Eris's former patient, Clara. Clara, a brilliant artist whose severe trauma and dissociative episodes had been exacerbated by Vance's merciless corporate raiding, was now vulnerable to a new, fabricated smear campaign initiated by Vance himself. "You knew the ethical bind I was in," Eris remembered saying, his voice barely a tremor of outrage. "You know what the stress did to her. She is fragile, and I swore I would protect her anonymity, her fragile peace." "Protection is expensive, Doctor," Vance had replied, his gaze contemptuous. "You made a small error in judgment on her confidentiality protocol 2 years ago. Nothing egregious, certainly, but absolutely actionable in a court of public opinion. If that were to become public, your license, your foundation, your entire life's work, well, it would be irretrievable. Clara, of course, would merely be collateral damage, a regrettable, though necessary casualty." This was the moral dilemma. Protect his own globally recognized career and let Vance methodically destroy an already damaged, innocent life, or defy Vance and face complete professional ruin and probable legal action. The choice had been excruciating, a slow-motion ethical amputation. The flashback crashed back to the present. Lynn's voice cut through the silence like a scalpel. "You mentioned a debt to him. Not financial, you said. What kind of debt, Doctor? We are discussing a man's death, not a slight to your ego." Eris inhaled deeply. "He held something over me, a professional indiscretion he could weaponize. He wanted me complicit in silencing a former patient he had deeply wronged. He wanted me to betray the very essence of my Hippocratic oath. And you went along with it? You aided him in his machinations?" I tried to reason with him. I tried to make him see that he would inevitably pay the piper for the years of emotional and financial damage he had inflicted on so many people. I warned him that his legacy would be one of malice and degradation. He simply smiled, a chilling, indifferent thing, and told me his legacy was wealth. He remembered his last session with Vance, the reason for the unscheduled visit. Vance had not been distressed. He had been utterly, chillingly triumphant. He had secured the final signed documents needed to frame Clara and publicly discredit Eris. The therapy session was merely a stage for his final vindictive victory lap. Eris felt a surge of cold, righteous fury, a feeling that even now felt terrifyingly justifiable.
It was an act of desperation, not malice. It must have been. Part 3. The Internal Labyrinth. The interrogation intensified with brutal efficiency. Lynn's questions became a staccato barrage, forcing Eris to reassemble the shattered pieces of the night under immense cognitive pressure. He struggled against the urge to succumb to the deep, hypnagogic state his insomnia induced. "The surveillance footage, Dr. Thorne," Lynn said, holding up a still image of the dark room, faintly illuminated by a single pulsing emergency light. The light source was ephemeral, but clear enough to distinguish two figures near the large marble fireplace. "This is just before 11:15 p.m. You are clearly visible. Mr. Vance is visible." And then... Eris interrupted, a sudden, desperate clarity piercing his confusion like a sliver of glass. "And then I realized what he was doing. He wasn't just gloating about ruining my career. He was recording the entire confrontation on a hidden device, planning to use my distress as further proof of my instability. His final, calculated act of extortion."
"Did you find the device, Doctor?" "No. I felt around the desk, frantically, desperately. The darkness was absolute again, only punctuated by the ominous glow of a city that had suffered a blackout. I heard a noise near the fireplace, a scraping sound, like something heavy being moved across the stone mantelpiece. It sounded like metal against marble." Eris paused. The sound, once vague, now sharp and metallic in his memory. "And what did you do in that profound darkness?" I moved towards the sound, blindly, a rush of blood to my head overcoming my better judgment. I needed to stop him, not only for myself, but for Clara. I had sworn I would protect her. He was standing there, near the mantelpiece, holding something. I lunged, a purely visceral reaction. Lind laid another piece of evidence on the table. A small, tarnished silver signet ring engraved with the Thorne family crest. This was found beneath a section of Persian rug near the fireplace. "It belongs to you, Dr. Thorne." Eris stared at the ring, his breath catching in his throat. He hadn't noticed it was missing, the absence lost in the cacophony of his own mounting paranoia. "That night, after the lights failed," Eris murmured, the memory finally solidifying, having seen the evidence on the table, "Vance and I struggled. Not a life or death struggle, but a frantic, desperate one over the documents he held. I must have lost the ring then, during the scuffle." "But the cause of death, Doctor," Lind pressed, her voice suddenly sharp, cutting through his recollections. "Mr. Vance died from a blunt force trauma to the back of the head. His body was found approximately 3 feet from the marble fireplace, which, coincidentally, is where you say you were struggling. Was the object you were lunging for a fireplace poker?" The question was a hammer blow. Eris's mind fractured again. He hadn't seen a poker. He had felt something hard in Vance's hand, yes, but he couldn't recall using it. The memory was deliberately obscured. Suddenly, another memory fragment, this one sharp and cold. A flash of light from outside the enormous bay window. Not lightning, but a camera flash, followed by a fleeting dark silhouette. "Wait," Eris whispered, his eyes wide, looking past Lynn to the sterile white wall. "There was a third person. I didn't see them, not clearly, but I heard a muffled step. The sound I heard, the scraping of metal, it wasn't Vance moving a poker. It was someone opening the hidden magnetic compartment beneath the mantelpiece."
Lind laughed, a dry, weary sound that echoed in the small room. The vanishing third man. That is a rather convenient and frankly threadbare story, Doctor. You're offering us a red herring to deflect from the undeniable physical evidence. No, it wasn't a man, Eris insisted, the realization hitting him with the force of a sledgehammer blow. It was Clara. The trauma, the fear of exposure. She was deeply dissociated. She knew the penthouse security system from years ago when she briefly consulted on the interior design. She was there to take the papers Vance held, not to kill him. He shuddered. Vance must have slipped, hitting his head when she startled him in the dark. I was shielding her, covering her escape, and I didn't even know it.
Eris realized the horrible, intricate truth. He wasn't entirely a killer, but he was profoundly complicit. He had unintentionally shielded Clara, the victim of Vance's cruelty, and now, out of professional loyalty and misplaced affection, he was shielding her again, fabricating the story of a mere fall. He had been so intent on convincing himself that he wasn't the murderer that he had completely ignored the possibility of an accomplice whose motives were inextricably linked to his own past failures. Part 4. The Reckoning, the Climax and Aftermath. Lind remained unmoving, her expression hardening. Your elaborate theory regarding Miss Vance's mental state does not negate the fact that your DNA is on the victim and your ring is at the scene. You are facing the most consequential hours of your life, Doctor.
Eris felt a cold sense of calm descend, the kind that precedes acceptance. Drastic times call for drastic measures, and his desperate self-preservation had now turned into a determined effort to protect Clara. He had to commit to the story he now believed, regardless of the consequences for himself. "Detective," he said, his voice regaining a semblance of its professional authority. "I can only offer you the facts as I remember them, fragmented as they are. The visceral reaction that night, the lunge toward him, it was instinct. My ethical core reacted to his imminent destruction of an innocent person. I cannot deny the physical contact, but I deny the intent to murder. My purpose was purely interventional." He focused on the final moments, the crucial murky juncture. Flashback, the night of the incident. The room was dark. Eris wrestled with Vance, not for a weapon, but for the thick manila envelope containing Clara's compromised records. Having wrestled the document away, Eris had stumbled back towards the window, the paper crackling in his hand. Vance, enraged and scrambling to regain the upper hand, had lunged in return, his heavy frame a terrifying missile in the dark.
"You pushed him, Doctor," Lynn stated, reviewing the blurred footage. "The movement is clear. You propelled him directly into the edge of the marble table." "I pulled away," Eris corrected, his eyes burning with conviction. "I pulled away when I realized the documents were safe. He overshot. The momentum carried him. He fell against the table. I saw the flash of the outside camera as he went down, but in the immediate aftermath, I was only concerned with the documents." Lynn tapped the file once more, a faint sense of disappointment in her eyes. "We found something else in the penthouse, Doctor. It was wedged behind a floor vent. It appears to be a small recording device, perhaps intended for secret notes. It wasn't running when found, but the audio file was intact." Eris's breath hitched. He had failed to cover one's tracks entirely, but perhaps Vance had failed too. Lind played a snippet of the audio, a brief scuffle, Eris's voice shouting a denial, Vance's voice clear and cold. "You should have known better, Eris. Now you'll watch it all burn." Then, a sickening, sharp thud, followed by silence. Crucially, there was no third voice, no woman's gasp. The sound shattered Eris's last internal defenses, obliterating his elaborate construction of Clara as the third party. The truth was not the complicated mosaic he had built to protect his patient. The truth was simpler and far more terrifying. "I didn't intend to
kill him, Eris whispered, the weight of the realization crushing him. If I hadn't been so consumed by my own paranoia, I would have seen the brutal simplicity of that moment. I wanted to stop him. The fall, it was an accident. Lind sighed, resting her hands on the table. Accident or not, Doctor, you have spent the last 3 days telling us lies and red herrings. You've been trying to sell us a cock and bull story. You weren't protecting a patient in that room. You were protecting your own compromised ethics. You were trying desperately to escape paying the piper. The image of the surveillance footage, the ring, the audio recording, all the pieces locked into place, forming the inescapable geometry of his guilt. Eris wasn't a deliberate killer, but his own desperate desire to control the narrative had implicated him more profoundly than any physical evidence. He was guilty of something, if not murder, then the profound arrogance of believing he could outsmart the consequences of his own past. He looked at Lind, a strange sense of defeated resignation washing over him. What happens now, Detective? Now, Doctor, Lind replied, gathering her files with finality. You face the music. We just need to find out why you worked so hard to give us the slip in the first place, when the truth was always far less damaging than your own fabricated alibis. The door clicked shut, leaving Eris Thorne alone in the blinding, sterile light, no longer certain if he was in the interrogation room or still wandering lost in the dark, self-made penthouse of his own broken mind.
To cover one's tracks, to hide or destroy evidence of one's actions, especially when trying to conceal a mistake or crime. The disgraced CEO tried to cover his tracks by shredding all the financial documents before the auditors arrived. But the digital trail was still clear. To be fraught with something. To be full of or loaded with something negative, such as danger, difficulty, or tension. The sensitive peace treaty negotiations were fraught with political tension, requiring constant mediation between the two rival parties. A red herring, meaning something that is misleading or distracting from the real issue or person, often used in detective stories. Example, the strange letter found in the victim's safe turned out to be a red herring deliberately planted by the true culprit to mislead the investigation. To pay the piper, meaning to face the unpleasant consequences of one's previous actions or decisions, especially after a period of pleasure or self-indulgence. Example, after years of financial recklessness and overspending, the celebrity finally had to pay the piper and sell off his entire property portfolio. To give someone the slip, meaning to escape or get away from someone who is chasing or following you, often by a clever maneuver. Example, the renowned jewel thief managed to give the detective the slip by ducking into the crowded metro station and changing his disguise on the train. All right, C1, C2 learners, the Liar's Hour has concluded, but the mystery hasn't. What's your verdict? Do you believe Dr. Thorne's final claim of an accident, or was his attempt to cover his tracks proof of deliberate murder? Let us know your theory in the comments below. Be sure to use at least one of the 5 advanced idioms you learned today to practice your new vocabulary. If this blend of a gripping thriller and high-level English helped you push your fluency forward, show us your support. Hit that like button right now. It's the easiest way to tell YouTube that you want more advanced stories like this one. And if you're serious about mastering C1, C2 English, you need to be here next week. Click subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story. Want more advanced practice? Click here to watch our last psychological thriller, The Silent Witness. Thank you for learning with us. We'll see you next time.